Genius is as common as dirt. We suppress genius because we haven't figured out how to manage a population of educated men and women. The solution, I think, is simple and glorious. Let them manage themselves. John Taylor Gatto, rest in peace. I absolutely love what John Taylor stood for in terms of education, real world learning, and the like. And this little piece here is from my first chapter of the upcoming book. Once you see this, you can't unsee it. And those who don't see it may never understand. But that's okay, because this is all about you. Asking yourself, what is your default life? Because for me, growing up, I thought that life had a similar path for all of us. We would learn skills in school, figure out the job that we're good at, find a job, get promoted, and retire. So that's what I did. It's what I thought I had to do. And the idea of being able to do anything outside of that, the plan, the prescription, seemed like it was impossible, like it was for other people, like it was for Post Malone or it was for Taylor Swift. It wasn't for me. But the idea of doing something for a living, you know how we talk about the idea of doing something for a living? To me, that is actually the crazy idea. The idea that we should do something for an entire lifetime is actually what's crazy. Life can be so much more. It can be easy, effortless, and enjoyable. But for the longest time, I felt like it had to be hard. Like when you woke up in the morning, you were going to battle, get all your armor on, because the world it's tough out there. You know, the world is difficult. You should feel a little bit tired all the time, that it was challenging because you're a warrior, you know, you're like Rocky and you're going to have to battle and grind, that we all needed to really work hard. And I'm not positive where that came from. We could probably ask some sort of sociologist or maybe psychologist if it's just me. But I think the idea of looking at the history of work and the things that we have learned from can really help us when it comes to, again, asking what is your default life and how did the world used to work versus how could we get the world to work for you today? Way, way, way back, everyone had to fend for themselves. Early hunter-gatherers, there was no commerce. There wasn't business. I love what Toby Lutke at Shopify is doing, where he says that in the future, it's going to be like the older days of like villages and markets. But before that, before there even were villages and markets, the idea of hunter-gathering, there was no commerce, no like trade. And then trade came in as the world changed. Way, way back, every person who worked simply solved a problem for other people in exchange for value. So it might have been bartering and trading. But if you picture those really old school villages in a classic Disney movie, what you would picture is things like castles, knights, the odd dragon, you know, rural village life where you might have a blacksmith, baker, innkeeper, farmer, carpenter, cobbler, fisherman, a potter, a butcher, someone who maybe teaches kids in the community, a musician. Certainly you have your jokers, and you have all of these different roles. Each of those people brings value in their own way. Then the world changed again. Technology, advancements in manufacturing, mass production, more efficient farming led to the Industrial Revolution, and improvements in transportation created the ability to have factories that could then ship things all around the world instead of tiny shops doing all those village jobs that I just talked about. But then another change comes. We have the internet, devices, a globalization, so being able to connect with each other all over the world. This leads to instant and unlimited amounts of knowledge, and in some ways, pretty negative stuff with the idea of instant gratification, but essentially the information age. When I think about this, I think about like the early days of ebooks, when YouTube first really started to have a lot of quality videos where if you wanted to learn how to sew something, you could type into YouTube how to sew. You could learn anything. And that still exists today, but there's almost too much of it. there's probably like 1,000 people making a video today about the history of work like I'm doing right now. So there's so much information. You can learn anything from anywhere at your fingertips. But as I write this, the world is changing yet again. And this is something that I'm super excited about. It's basically becoming my life's work, doing something for a living. And that's that information is old news. So all of the knowledge that we have is available at our fingertips for free on YouTube or whatever else. And AI is freeing humans up to do creative work the majority of the time. So a lot of the process around creating something, a lot of the work and the little tasks and jobs that we do can be outsourced to robots, which is pretty crazy to think. And it's going to be more and more and more. So we now enter the creator economy, or the age of ownership, I like to call it, the age of freedom, where you have more autonomy than ever to design your life. Design it in a way that works for you. I have a book on my shelf somewhere near here called Right Brain Rising, all about how right brain people will take over the future. The people that can be creative, that can create and curate synthesis, that know how to laugh and tell jokes, know how to make videos or podcasts or entertaining writing and all of those creator things, that those people will take over the world. Now, he was really ahead of the game when he wrote that book, because I think the first time I read it was about 10 years ago, and I was excited for this future, but it wasn't really here yet. The super dope thing is it's here now. And to understand why it's so valuable and exciting to be heading into the creator, freedom, autonomy economy is to appreciate why the rich used to get richer. It's a famous saying, the rich get richer. But why does this happen? It all boils down to one word: control. If I added a second word, I would put leverage, but essentially control. The people with money control assets, therefore they control the opportunities, and they control their own futures. They build brands, create awareness, and then people buy their products and services, while a lot of other people get stuck trying to play catch up and figure out where they belong, and really ending up just being consumers, watching Netflix instead of making a movie, buying a hoodie instead of designing their own. And this control in general comes from leverage, being able to lift something easier. Creating more and more ownership creates more and more leverage. It's just simple math. And this leverage leads to compounding gains. It used to be that only a small group of elites, the 1% of the 1%, had the most leverage and could create all of those gains. That's what kind of held the people down. There's that classic scene from The Simpsons about holding the people down and the system holding people down, and how it felt rigged because it was. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still a little bit rigged, but not quite anymore. There's a massive modern silver lining, and I'm not talking about investing in crypto a couple years ago and then being a millionaire because you made one quick trade, or the fact that maybe you make like a fidget spinner on Shopify and it takes off. I'm talking about more sustainable opportunities for ownership and leverage that just didn't exist before. A lot of these things are brand new now, and that's why it's so exciting. You can start owning more and controlling what matters. You can build your own leverage. Not only can you, I'm a big believer that everyone should own something. It doesn't mean that you need to set out to create a Fortune 500 company or build a tech startup. Simply owning a podcast where you make an episode once a month is enough. But just in a very binary way, green light, red light, if I ask you the question, do you own something? What is the answer? Because it's either a yes or no answer. We can get into the details. We could talk about that at a different time. But just the fact that you own something that you can create, Nobody can stop you from doing that because we're in the ownership age. There's just no more excuses. You get to choose your own path, no more gatekeepers. Yet, in many ways, schools still play a role in brainwashing us, making us do busy work, rewarding things like writing with complex, complicated words, silent listening. I wish this story was a joke, but I was recruiting teachers one time, and I asked someone who knew a teacher if this person who was a young up and coming teacher, if they were good, good at their job. And no word of a lie, the response was, yeah, they're amazing. Every time I go by their classroom, all of the kids are silent. And I think when I get upset, I laugh sometimes because I'm laughing about that concept right now, thinking that we are excited about and rewarding the idea of being silent in a classroom, which we're not about to get into the logistics of running a school because it's difficult. It's not easy. But when we boil things down to first principles, we could easily argue that a super silent classroom is not necessarily something to celebrate. This idea of rewarding those things, organizing people by bells, grades, rows, and certainly ages is something that Ken Robinson talked about needing to do away with when he wrote Schools Kill Creativity. And one of the most sad, difficult challenges is realizing that it's almost impossible to change this from the inside. That school itself can change a little bit, but it's like an ocean liner. It's going to move super slow. And in order to get in a speedboat or a jet ski and make quick changes, you're going to have to do it for yourself. You're going to have to pass it along to your children or your nieces and nephews or kids that you teach or coach. And if you're looking to do something yourself, you are going to have to learn it yourself. You can't wait for the system to change. Sometimes, of course, it's worth it to play the game of school. You're going into a certain program, become a lawyer, doctor. You want the experience of going to school, but you need to play the game with awareness and play it on purpose. Be aware that the things that are being rewarded don't necessarily help you in the real world. Another quick story. I was helping someone write an essay just today, but she called it an article. Can you help me write my article? And I said, sure. And she showed me a bunch of work she had already done and said, is this the right structure? And so I was playing along a little bit. I said, what do you mean by right structure? And she said, well, I had a teacher that told me my writing isn't specific enough and isn't following the right structure. And I didn't understand what she meant. So I want to know, do you think I'm following the right structure? And then I was like, talk about opening a can of worms. We got into discussing what is the target publication? Because if it's for Medium, then this structure is already too formal and the paragraphs are already too long. If it's for an academic journal, then sure. But if you're creating it as a thread for X or as a caption to a social media post on Instagram, then it's an entirely different story because it's way too long. And we could talk about the idea of online writing forever. It's another one of those infinite games that I love. But the point was that she felt like there was one way to do things the right way. That in the real world, she had to do things like she was being told to do them in school. Now, I would love to ask you a question about all of this idea of ownership and leverage. What do you own right now? And if the answer is nothing, that's cool. It doesn't matter. Again, you don't have to, but I think you should at least start thinking about it. So what could you build that you would own? If you knew you couldn't fail, what would you do? And I would love to actually hear about it. Email me, reach out at Just Keep Learning. Let me know what you're up to, either what you're building or what you're thinking about building. And before we wrap, I just want to share a few quotes. I know I shared one at the top, but about the fact that teachers don't even realize that they're still playing a lot of the brainwashing from a previous economy that we don't really need anymore. And there's an ancient proverb that reads, tragically in a way, I guess, I don't know who discovered water, but it wasn't a fish. Schools fail to see the big picture. They don't even realize that they are immersing you in a sea of useless activities. And what really pisses me off about this is that we've known this for an insanely long time. I want to read a few quotes for you, 3 quotes. In 2009, John Taylor Gatto wrote, "Function of school is to train kids not to think at all, to turn them into addicts by dumbing them down and demoralizing them in order to train them to be employees and consumers." And then in 2001, Sir Ken Robinson, who still has one of the most watched TED Talks of all time on this exact topic, so clearly people care about it, said, "We need to adapt to the modern money-making realities. The future of work depends on entrepreneurship and creativity. Education should be about helping you build life skills by finding a combination of what you are good at, what you are passionate about, and where it can take you." And then this one just blows my mind. When do you think John Dewey wrote, "All genuine, practical, real-world education comes about through experience. School must harness a student's natural interests, powers, creativity, and innovation"? When do you think he wrote that? This dude wrote that over 100 years ago, over 120 years ago in 1902. And if we were about to get a little bit silly with all this, we could talk about 1700 years ago, Plato saying, "An unexamined life is not worth living. A slave is someone who takes action without expressing their own ideas." Yet, schools, workplaces, they've continued to double down on getting people to fall in line. And there's a really big, deep heart reason why this makes me so sad. School serves the masses and is a training ground for tiny dreams. But the downstream effect of living in a world that doesn't understand your unique abilities can lead to serious problems. And that's an understatement. Things like addiction, depression, and much, much worse. I see it every day. And it pains me if you don't understand how to choose both a mission and a method that's super important to you. Because clearly, the old school ways of taking action are starting to suck. But that's actually good news. This can really work in your favor, and we'll talk about it in a future episode. What I've come to realize, though, is it's up to the individual. Like the 6 inches speech in Any Given Sunday, I think, where he talks about the fact that he can't do it for you because he's too old. I'm not necessarily too old to do some of the things that people want to do, but I can't do it for you. You need to do it for yourself. It's up to you. You can't wait around for a superhero. You need to embrace the new world. Think, hey, creator economy's here. Autonomy, freedom economy's here. What can I go make? What can I own? And get down to work. You will crush it, especially if you love what you're doing. I know you will. All the best. And until the next episode, just keep learning.